How do caregivers find the strength to continue day after day, navigating the complexities of dementia and Alzheimer's? It's a journey that demands resilience, patience, and an often overlooked capacity to find joy in the simplest moments. My guest, Angela Lunde, has dedicated over 20 years to understanding the experiences of those living with dementia and their care partners. Her insights, brilliant, compassionate, and loving insights into the emotional landscape of caregiving, are both profound and encouraging. Angela is not just a researcher, but a true advocate working tirelessly to improve the quality of life for people impacted by dementia. She serves as an associate in neurology at the Mayo Clinic's Alzheimer's Disease Research Center and has contributed to numerous publications and books on topics ranging from mild cognitive impairment to innovative solutions for well-being. Angela believes in the power of community and the importance of reducing stigma, integrating persons with dementia into everyday life, and supporting those who care for them. Today, Angela sheds light on the ways caregivers find resilience, how new patterns of communication can transform relationships, and the role of acceptance in navigating the caregiving journey. In this episode, we also talk about the Connect to Caregiver study at Mayo Clinic, a research initiative aimed at providing peer-to-peer emotional support for dementia caregivers. We're joined by Joan Karp, a care partner for her husband living with Alzheimer's, who has personally experienced the benefits of a mindfulness-based dementia caring program. Together, we talk about the real-life challenges caregivers face, the surprising sources of strength they tap into, and the importance of creating supportive, connected communities. Whether you're a caregiver, a family member, or someone interested in the well-being of those impacted by dementia, this conversation promises to be heartfelt, insightful, and inspiring. Here is my interview with Angela Lunde and Joan Karp. Welcome, ladies. I am very honored, and it means a lot to me that you would take time out of your busy days. And I know we have a lot going on in our world, so I appreciate you being here. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Nicole. Happy to be here with you and with Joan.
Yeah,
Me too.
Thank you. It's wonderful to have both of you here. There's such richness and unique perspectives within that. And for us to learn a little bit more about you, can you share more about your personal story? For you, Angela, we'll start. What led you to focus on dementia caregiving? And then we'll learn a little bit from Joan about your background.
Good question, Nicole. And one I actually kind of enjoy asking because it may not be what people expect. I sort of landed in this space of dementia and ultimately having a very strong interest in understanding the lived experience of caregivers because I was in a place where I was kind of seeking out a new career and some new challenges. And I remember seeing this opportunity through the Mayo Clinic, and I think it was described as something like we're looking for a dementia outreach or a dementia specialist in some way. And I thought, well, that would be unique and challenging because I don't know what dementia is. And so I went in, and for some reason, even in my interview, when I asked them to explain what dementia was, I was selected for this position, and not knowing anything really became my opportunity and my gift. So I spent the first couple years getting to know caregivers and persons with dementia, visiting them in their homes, volunteering at my church at the time to stay and to do respite for families who were down this path. And so my initial understanding of the lived experience didn't come through a course or a class or a medical lens. It really came through understanding the true day-to-day lives of persons with dementia and caregivers. And I've been intrigued and interested and dedicated ever since.
And that's what it really is, though, right? The day to day and being in those moments. Absolutely. And Joan, tell us a little bit more about you. I'd love to learn.
Okay, well, following Angela, I can't let that go by without saying how fantastic Angela is. And, I've been feeling through this period of time that no one can possibly understand what I'm going through unless they've gone through it themselves. And even then, we all have very different situations and stories. But I just completed this 9-week course with Angela, and I have to say that for the first time, I really felt understood. Her ability to really understand what people go through and help guide people and give people tools was amazing for me. And so I had to say that following her. But my story is that I am a caregiver for my husband who has Alzheimer's. He was diagnosed 4.5 years ago, and we've known each other for 33 years. We've been married for 25, and we've been together as a couple for 28. And he is the love of my life, and I've been really blessed to be with him. And so the last 4.5 years, I've been going on this journey with him. It's not easy. Prior to that, I had a career on Wall Street and lived in New York City. And my husband and I traveled a lot. I've been really blessed with a wonderful, exciting life. And now at this point in my life, I'm 68 years old. At this point in my life, I really don't have regrets. My friends are traveling and things. And I just feel like I was lucky to have that time. And now I'm devoting myself to him, which I don't want to call it a job, but at times, it kind of can feel that way. I also cared for my mother. My mother had a devastating stroke when I was in my 30s, and she lost language, receptive and expressive aphasia. And for 9 years, she needed to be in a home. And so I went through that with her, and she had dementia, not Alzheimer's. So I've had two experiences, and that's what brings me here to talk to you today.
Just so thankful that you are willing to share with us more about your experience and all of that. I know, having this life, that rightful life, and how beautiful that is that you guys have had all those moments together, and now it's shifted. And now we're able to talk about, what that looks like for you and how you're supported. And to your point, when you were talking about Angela, when we first started our call, her first question was asking about how you were doing. And I just thought that was such a beautiful moment and interaction of, right, checking in and the compassion. So we need that, right? We need that when we're walking through all of this. So thank you.
Absolutely.
There are a lot of challenges, right, that we face. And I always, for me, two things can be true at the same time. I really believe that, right? We can have joy and hardness, we can have happiness and sadness. And I think a lot of times we feel pressured to like have to choose these one emotions, but I really do believe that it really does all live together. And so within those challenges, I know that there are the light, right? But I think we also connect to each other when we're going through those hard times. And so for family caregivers and when we're caring for our loved ones living with dementia, we have some things that we have to overcome. For you, what have you found to be some of those common things that we walk through when we're in our caring journey? I'd like to just learn a little bit more about that.
Well, I think it's great that you phrased it for me because, like I said, I think that everyone goes through their own version of this. And while some of the challenges I've had might not apply to other people and some might ring true, I just don't know. I would say that over the 4.5 years, I've gone through phases. So after he was diagnosed, it was just grief, shock. I couldn't breathe for a year. I had so much stress in my body and I didn't know what to do with it. And it was also during COVID. So all avenues were sort of shut down to us and we were on our own, to deal with this. My husband is an amazing man and he's a planner. And he always did things like managing our investments. And he was also on Wall Street. And he said, within the year, I'm going to have to transfer all of this to you, and we're going to have to put a plan in place. Mm-hmm. And so one of the challenges was, how do you deal with all of this grief and at the same time come to terms with the fact that, yes, this is happening and our future is going to look very different, and we have to prepare for that. And as you're saying, there can be a couple of things going on at once. And for us, it was, how can I walk around in this hyper state of grief and distress and start taking over finances and logistics and going to lawyers. We had to change, powers of attorney and things like that. It was a very difficult period. After I started taking over things, then you're just overwhelmed with, oh my gosh, I have all of this on my plate and I'm watching him losing abilities. And I'm having to pick up on that as well. So I think that as the journey continues, there are different challenges. And part of what I needed to do was to always say, where are we now? How can I find acceptance for what's happening? How can I best support him? How can I help him be happy, maintain a feeling of self-respect? One of the things we did is we told everyone right away. That's a big issue for caregivers, right? And the patients. Who do we tell? Do we get out there with it? Do we keep it to ourselves and try to have life as normal as long as possible? And for us, we said, you know what? This is a disease like any other. If he had cancer or any other disease, we would be out there with it and we would have support from friends. But there's a stigma when it's dementia. So we got out there right away. We told people, and we've had an amazing amount of support from our friends as a result.
I'm so happy to hear that. I know when you were sharing about, right, you're in the grief, but then you're now responsible for all of these things. And I've had issues in my life where you have to still show up for your life, but yeah, you're almost like in this free state of like, I'm going through the motions and I need to take care of all these things. But no one else really knows what's going on around me. And so I love that you talk about focusing on like, where are we now? What can I do now? Rather than it's easy to get full of anxiety thinking about, years and all that's to come. Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I would add, on the discussion that Joan has brought up, you asked about challenges and in so much of what Joan said and others have said, it's losses. And it's not just the loss of the person who is diagnosed with the disease. It's Joan and other care partners going through losses as well. So there's two people there. And the other common theme that Joan brought up that I will just echo from the thousands of care partners that I think I've had the opportunity to know over the last couple of decades is the grief and the guilt. I think those are the two, and it's this, and they shift. It feels like there's just sort of always this looming feeling of grief and guilt, but the nature of what's behind them changes a little bit, and sometimes it's the guilt of feeling trapped,
Mhm.
perhaps for some, or feeling like, as I think Joan may have experienced recently, and all care partners experience, that you're not cut out for this, or that you made mistakes, or that you've somehow failed. You failed the other person, or you failed yourself. Sometimes it's feeling guilty because you need a break, or you want it out of this. Sometimes it's feeling guilt for feeling happy, because right, we do. There are those moments where we actually find a way to let joy into our lives, and I think sometimes caregivers even feel guilty through that. And one of the things too that you asked early on, or that I was just thinking of in your last question as well, Nicole, is what sort of brings you into this work. And I think about what has sustained me in this work. And it is just how enriching, when you go through difficulty, when you go through adversity, one of two things happens. Either you are able to find this well of resilience that I think is part of who we all are, or you find yourself in this dark, really deep place and you can't get out.
Mhm.
And so one of the things early on that really intrigued me was, why is it that some caregivers, everyone's going through a traumatic experience, and then there are some caregivers, care partners who seem to find this resilience to make their way through, and then there's these others who fall into this deep, dark space.
Mhm.
And when I started to understand that, that really became an opportunity to help people recognize that even though we're all sharing a very common difficult thing, that there is hope. And you don't just need to get through it. It's not just about getting through it to sort of get to the end, but there is a way to really go through it and at the same time preserve your identity and preserve your own well-being.
Mm.
And so what we can try to capture, and I think a little bit through this conversation and then other resources that Joan and I can share with you, is there is hope. We're not going to change this. We're not going to change the difficulty and the anger and the resentment and the guilt and the grief that go along with it. But we have the tools to change our relationship to the struggle so we don't lose ourselves in the process.
Yes. And that is the perfect segue to, so where do we go, right? Where do we find that strength and resilience? And what have you seen when for those that have found their way in that versus those that are in that dark space? Is there something identifying within that that we can find hope in?
Yeah. Well, I'll share a few things, and then I know Joan has, kind of her own toolbox, if you
Mhm.
will, perhaps, of things that maybe she gravitates to. I think in my own experience, where that resilience lies is in first recognizing that we don't have to be strong.
Mhm.
You know, sometimes I just get this cringe when I say, how did you find the strength to get through this? And I think as Joan and others will say, I don't. I'm fragile. I break down. I crumble. So it's acknowledging that we don't have to be strong and that we feel fragile and scared and lonely, but these are feelings that we have in the moment. They don't necessarily define who we are as a person. But I think it's what's also as probably pivotal in this transformation to be able to access the resilience that I think we all have is moving toward this state of accepting, of letting go, and of letting things be. And when I say accepting, I'm not saying acceptance is liking it or agreeing with the situation or condoning it. It's not giving up or giving in. Acceptance is simply making peace with what is. It's recognizing and moving to a place where we realize we can't save our loved one from an incurable disease. And when we do so, we're no longer resisting. Acceptance is moving to this place of truly believing that good enough is good enough and that we can't control everything.
Wow. I know so many people are going to be touched by that and be encouraged. Absolutely. Joan, how have you found that those things that you've put in place have given you some of that resilience?
Well, I would say that there was the time before Angela, the time after Angela. And I think there's a big difference. So I'll talk about before Angela first. I think what got me through before I had the toolbox that I have now was just this intense desire to give us the best we could have. I recognize that we can no longer have the best there is. We can have the best that we can have, and finding out what that is. Seeing where he is, what works for us, not forcing things that don't work anymore, really trying to see him and go to him because he isn't always able to come to me. And I think that success builds success and success builds resilience. So as I took over some of the finances and other responsibilities and worked through one problem after another. My husband is very headstrong. And so my version of this disease is he gets an idea about wanting something, and whether it makes sense or not, he goes after it. And then I have to figure out how to deal with that. And that is very stressful. So we've had a number of those. And I just find that every time I handle something well and I have a little bit of success, it gives me the confidence and the strength to move forward. I recognize no one's coming to save me. If I don't do it, it's not getting done. He basically has at this point what I can give him, and I have what I can give to myself. That was a post Angela revelation.
Yeah.
um,
Oh,
Yeah,
and
it reminds me of something that I so learned from Joan, right? I mean, the reason I can give in the way that I can give is because of what I've received. That's the only way I can do this. That's the only reason when Joan said in the beginning, here's somebody who gets it, is because I've received and then I can give that back. And one of the things that really stands out for me, that Joan taught me, is just how often um, caregivers are sort of under the radar
mm,
and unrecognized, and specifically unrecognized for the duration of this journey. Joan shared with me, I don't know, a week or so ago that she's been a caregiver, a care partner, or started to define herself like that, like 1,678. I don't remember what the number was, but it was something like that. And I think we don't recognize when we talk about resilience. The other thing to recognize is we're talking about sustained resilience. Like, how do you
mm,
wake up every single morning and sort of find this well of resilience? And the answer is you don't. That some days you are just, Joan is not going to be the resilient Joan. Instead, she's just going to say, I really am just not dealing with this well today. But what the shift is the acknowledgement and the recognition that today I am not resilient Joan.
mm,
Today I am feeling incompetent and whatever else she might be feeling. But she recognizes that that is the moment, and that is where she is in the moment. And then the other thing that Joan and I talked about a week or so ago is too, I think there's this, this unrecognition from others because it happens so gradually.
yeah.
And other people will come and visit, and sometimes in those short visits, people with dementia, even though it may be fairly advanced, can sort of rise to the occasion. And sometimes for care partners, that's frustrating. They want others to recognize what they're going through. And this is something we've referred to as disenfranchised grief, when you're
mm,
not being recognized for the life you're having to sort of work in and the experience you're going through right now. But it was this recognition of we can give people tools. They can fill their toolbox. They can intellectually know how to use these tools. But because of the sustained resilience that this requires, sometimes you're going to put your toolbox aside and
mm.
just say, today is tough, period.
Absolutely.
And that toolbox, you're constantly reaching in for something new because the situation is ever changing. I mean, as their brains are changing, their behavior is changing, their thought patterns are changing, what they're capable of is changing. And when you wake up in the morning, you don't know what the day is going to bring. So this idea of, excuse me, duration,
Mm.
um, I wrote to Angela and I said, oh my gosh, I counted up the days today. And I think to myself, okay, where are we in this process? And maybe am I halfway through this? Well, it's a terrible thought because at the end of this, it's worse. At the end of this, I won't have my husband.
Mm.
So you're going through these days that can be very difficult, but you're trying to salvage each one and get the most out of it and be connected because you know that this could be the best day that you're going to have. And it's very difficult to wake up, deal with the challenges, and try to pull that out of every day. Um, I also feel like, I used to be a runner, and in a marathon, there's the 20-mile mark, and people hit the wall, and everyone trains, not to hit the wall. And I don't know where my wall is. I don't know where my 20-mile marker is, and I don't want to hit the wall. I think sometimes people can cruise along for what is it, 1,600 days, 2,000 days. I mean, I don't know how many. And then at some point, if you aren't caring for yourself, it is possible that the challenges are going to get bigger and we're not going to be able to to meet them.
Yeah.
So there's this self-care component, but it's a lot going on at one time. One of the things that I learned, so many things I learned from Angela, but one of them is, and I tell myself this all the time, nothing's permanent. This will pass. So, he's coming at me with a new challenge, and I say, this will pass. Don't let that stress response become so intense. Take a deep breath, step back, observe what's happening, think about how I want to respond, and try not to have that, fight or flight thing where every hair on my body is standing up and I'm just screaming inside. So I think that because we are in this marathon, it's very important to learn how to deal with the moment and tell yourself that this will pass. So how can I best deal with this at the time? And it's a long process. It's kind of a funny thing, in Alcoholics Anonymous, I was thinking about this, that, people stand up and they say, hi, I've been sober for, I don't know exactly how it works. I haven't been, but I've been sober for, 53 days. And if there was a caregiver anonymous, I would stand up and say, hi, I've been a caregiver for 1,650 days.
Yeah.
Right. And everybody would go, yay, Joan, 650 days.
Right.
But we don't have that.
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
Joan talks about sort of being in the moment and, kind of recognizing that, there's decline, there's loss, there's change, but yet through every stage, there's still something there. There's still something, to recognize. And, you know, and we're all wired to have something, Rick Hansen calls, negativity bias, that we look for the bad and we sort of then cling on to it. And when we talk about looking for the good, I don't like to come across as, I don't want to diminish the challenge of the caregiving experience. I'm not asking for people to put on rose-colored glasses, right? But what I think is so important is to recognize that we have this tendency, and I'll coin what another care partner said. Says we have this tendency to borrow trouble. Right. In other words, we're kind of looking or thinking or anticipating the worst. And so, when something bad happens, what we tend to sometimes do is have these catastrophic thoughts in our own mind, which is, oh my God, here he goes again. This will never end. Right. And then, as Joan mentioned, you sort of switch that narrative in your head and you say, this is difficult in the moment. Because if we're not looking and allowing ourselves to see the joy, it will pass right through us. So part of this toolkit, as Joan described, is making space to not only learn how to be with difficulty, but to recognize that alongside difficulty, there are little moments of joy sitting right there, but you have to be open and mindful enough to let them in.
Completely. There's two women that I've had the honor to meet and get to know who started a podcast called Remember Me. And if you're familiar, they lost both of their parents to frontal temporal dementia, and they have this campaign where it is see the good. And that's exactly kind of what you're referencing, is that in all of those, right, hard moments, and I've never heard it articulated that way, the sustaining, right? It's not only resilience in those moments, but given this disease, it is sustained over so much time. And so being able to look and see the good, not acknowledging that there isn't challenge in it. But I love that you say find the joy that's sitting alongside it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I would also say, don't focus on the losses. because and I'm not even talking about losses in terms of what my husband can do, but losses in our life. You really have to be realistic and say, this is my life now. And how can I construct this day, this week, so that we can have a good life? And that means giving up a lot. You know, we don't go to big group interactions anymore. We don't go to anything where there's loud music. We don't go to, the list is a mile long, right? We only go out with good friends. We don't go out with people we don't know. We don't go out late. We don't go out for more than an hour and a half. And that's always changing. But it's how do you construct that life so that at the end of the day, you can say, you know what, today wasn't too much, but it wasn't too little. I
Mm.
found that spot, that sweet spot, and we had a good day. We had a good day.
It is. And there's the support and the resilience and the awareness does come from that peer to peer. And I know that, Angela, you've worked with that support, right? Not only emotionally, but all the other ways that we can, as you call, I think it was like build that well of resilience. And I'd love to hear more about that, what that looks like. What are the different opportunities for people to dive in and to be able to find that support system?
Mhm. I think it's going to look, I think support is going to look different for everyone.
Mhm.
I think there are some common skills or strategies or tools that I think are important for everybody to have in their toolbox. And one is I would just say to learn everything you can. Right. We have to have this level of knowledge of understanding this disease so that we can attribute some of the challenges to the disease and make it less about the person, right? And this is especially true, I think, when it's a couple, a partnership, a spousal relationship. Um, I think the other thing that is universal that people need to put in their toolbox is new communication skills. Um, if we want to decrease the irritability, the agitation, that are common amongst couples, we have to learn how to communicate in a way that acknowledges the changes of these diseases. So those two things I think are absolutely critical. And then the third thing I would say, and this really alludes to what you're saying, Nicole, is we can't go this alone.
Mhm.
We can't go this alone, whether it's a support group, virtual support group, or an in-person support group. Maybe it's just a group of informal friends who can gather. The program that Joan and I have alluded to in the before and after, Angela, is actually a program that's called Mindfulness-Based Dementia Caring. It's through an organization that I'm part of called Presence Care. So for caregivers who are interested in filling their toolbox with some of the things that Joan and I have alluded to, it's using mindfulness techniques and self-compassion, uh, recognition to add to that degree of support. And what that allows you to do, I think, is also to get to know other people in a pretty deep level and to be open to share the good, the bad, and the ugly. I have one thing that I'll add and then turn it over to Joni. Joan,
Okay.
sometimes too, I think in terms of practical skills, one of the buzzwords that people talk about is self-care. And I also know that sometimes that word to caregivers can be like, okay, here's one more thing to feel guilty
Right.
about
That
because
I
I
have
have
to
to add
do.
one more thing to my to-do list.
Mhm.
And one of the things that we talk about is that self-care doesn't need to be adding one more thing. And in fact, sometimes self-care is looking at the things that we can maybe remove or reduce or simplify in our life. Sometimes it's looking at what are the things in my life that are taking up energy and are not actually that nourishing to me. Sometimes it's looking at your friends and deciding, this is a friend I probably need to spend more time with because I get nurture back from them. I get acceptance. And this is a friend that maybe depletes my energy. So I want to look at less time with them, or it may be looking at how much time you're spending watching the news or your Netflix or social media. Not that these are bad things, but I think we need to look at, are they nurturing things, or are they taking away from that? So I look at self-care as asking yourself the question, what brings me back to myself?
Mm.
And maybe it's something as simple as a morning walk when I can fit it in to watch the sunrise, or, maybe it's, just, a short little yoga flow that you do with yourself in the morning, or an evening bubble bath. It doesn't really matter, but I think the knowing that you have a self-care regimen, I think is important, but defining it in a way that's reasonable is just as important.
I love that language. What brings me back to myself? I'm going to remember that for myself. Joan, is there anything you wanted to add on to that or?
One of the things that I find very helpful is what Angela calls a bookend practice. And that is when my head is on the pillow in the morning and when my head is on the pillow at night, I make sure I spend a little extra time in bed just letting thoughts flow through my mind. In the morning, maybe somehow overnight, I've digested what happened the day before and I'm waking up with a new strategy for it. In the evening, I'm kind of reviewing the day, but then I'm trying to let go of it before I go to sleep. And, I've said to Angela, um, at times I will think of all the other caregivers out there who are also putting their heads on the pillow or waking up in the morning. And, we're kind of this like separate community, but we don't really know each other.
Right.
And we're all trying to construct our days in a positive way um, to get the most out of them. The other thing I would say is that the self care thing, I mean, I am someone who was very big on self care. Over 4.5 years, I have abandoned some things that were very much a part of me and have had a hard time working them back in. Exercise, things like a manicure and a pedicure. You two can see this, but no one else can. My hair is now gray. It wasn't 2 years ago. It came out of a bottle.
Mine is too.
And, and these are things I keep telling myself that I'm going to work on and I'm going to do differently. But now I recognize, what, right now, that's not who I am. And maybe at some point that's who I will be. But right now, that's not what gives me a great day. What gives me a great day is making sure that my husband has all the foods that he likes and, he is excited about his day and whatever that means. So self-care can change. And we don't have to hold on to those past vestiges of things. I mean, we evolve through this process. And it doesn't mean that we've lost ourselves necessarily. It means that we have followed a path that's more productive, but it has to feel productive. It can't feel like we're doing some self-damage. It's hard to keep that up over a long period of time. I'm back to that period of time.
Yeah, it is the sustained. And having you share about that, I think does give us and people listening that permission to know that, we don't have to be tied to what maybe our self-care was how many years ago, that every day is different. I have a dear friend in my life who so beautifully will ask me, "How are you feeling today?" And I love that question because it lets me show up in that moment of where I am in that at that time versus, well, you said 2 weeks ago that everything was fine or that you're having a hard, it's like we need to also understand that how we feel and what is important to us can change moment to moment, hour to hour, and that's okay. That's okay. So we learn that from each other. We learn that from each other. There's programs that I know, Angela, you're involved with, and I'd love to hear more about that. So as people listening that need that support can understand where the access is. I think a lot of times we just don't know what we don't know, and being able to share that. And then I'd love to round out our time with just, a last word of encouragement and hope for the people that are listening to us today. So Angela, if you
Sure. I'll just briefly say a couple of things. One of the caregivers and understanding caregivers is something that is hopefully you're seeing as near and dear to my heart. This is what has sustained me because it's enriched my life. Um, when you help individuals with their struggle, you help yourself as well. You allow
Mm,
your own self to be vulnerable, and that's what we all need permission to do. So I think Joan and I think those who have come before her who constantly remind me that I am not alone in my struggle, even though the struggle may be different. Um, we currently have one of the things we're working on and excited about at Mayo is we have a study we're doing called Connect to Caregivers, and it really is just this. It's a um, an innovative tool that we're using that matches caregivers to one another for the purpose of emotional support, but it matches them in a bit more of a sophisticated way. We all have people that we connect with in our lives more than others, right? We have people who really fuel and feed what we need. So this particular study, we've developed this tool that helps us sort of identify the sort of individual we would want for emotional support. We
mm,
all want someone, we all need someone. So that's something that we're doing that I'm really proud of. We're just starting to get data in to really look at if we have something that's going to be valuable to individuals. Um, I think it's also really important to recognize, the Alzheimer's Association, the Lewy Body Dementia Association, the Association for Frontal Temporal Dementia, Dementia Action Alliance are my go-tos. For my own personal recognition of where resources are, and they're oftentimes where I send families. I already mentioned presence care and the mindfulness-based dementia caring program. And so if you Google presencecareproject.com, you'll find that there. Um, through inspiration of individuals like Joan and others that have come before her couple years ago, I have a really small book called Day to Day, A Guide for Offering Care and Support, that talks a lot about some of these things. You can find that at, Amazon or whatever, but it can be a little quick reference for individual who need to figure out, how do I get resilience? Where do I find that today?
mm.
So those are a few things that I would mention.
Thank you. And we'll include those links in our episode description so people listening can easily find and learn more about that. Are you finding any data or is it too soon to tell?
We are, the kind of cool thing about this study is, it's a clinical trial, and so we're recruiting hundreds of caregivers, and 50% gets matched based on the preferences that they say are important to them, and 50% get randomly matched to other
Mm,
caregivers.
okay.
And so that's really what we're interested in. And preliminary, very early data is beginning to sort of say that, um, we all, have a sense of what kind of relationship works for us and what doesn't. And when we're able to choose, it sometimes that sustaining emotional support goes better. So
Right,
more to
right.
come on that.
I'm so curious. Well, and for caregivers listening, they're able to go and perhaps participate in the study, correct?
Yeah. Mhm.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So, yes, please do that if you're interested. And, for people that are just beginning this care partnering role and um, need a little bit of that help, what would you like to share with us as we end our time today?
I will
Um,
start, and then I'll let
okay.
Joan have the final word. I think what I want people to recognize is that real strength comes from opening up to that vulnerable side of you, to recognizing that you are struggling, you can't do this alone, that you need help, and that forgiveness and self-compassion need to be in your everyday toolbox. That when we join a support group or a mindfulness program, we are an empathic witness to one another. And
Mm.
that alone reduces the trauma of this experience. And I want to end my final comments on actually, Joan, you can, if we need to cut this, Joan, we can cut it because it's actually, I'm going to read something that Joan sent to me because I think it just needs to be said word by word. Joan said this: I am a talker. I talk things out with friends, but I have never felt so incapable of expressing how hard my days are, and I keep the pain in my heart to myself. The deep understanding, your deep understanding, the deep understanding of the participants in her group of what caregivers go through and of the torment of the disease validated my struggle. I didn't realize how much I needed to be understood and to have a feeling of community. As different as we all are, I see the struggle of my classmates and know that there is a whole sea of people out there who get this. It is like an alternative universe going on in homes all across the world. This speaks to community, connection, vulnerability, and the power of finding a support system.
Wow.
I write a lot and I send it all to Angela.
Maybe a book is in
It's
your future.
it's very cathartic.
Oh, oh, very
Um,
healing. Yeah.
you know, I would just say find a way to accept it. And that doesn't happen once. You have to accept it over and over again. Find a way to accept it. Learn all you can about whatever your partner is going through, whatever disease that might be, so that you can kind of, as things develop along the way, and you look at him one day and you say, "Oh my gosh, she's having trouble putting on that shirt. I read about that. I understand that." Get ahead of it a little bit, but mainly just find that way to accept it, because this is your life. This isn't some thing off to the side that you have to deal with. It's not like you can continue having the life that you've always had, and then you have this little thing that's over here in this box that you wake up and you take care of. It's not like you take the dog for a walk 3 times a day or whatever it is. I have a cat, so I don't know about dogs really. I clean the litter box, but it's not like something like that. It is your life. And by starting to meet some more caregivers, I do watch people in that beginning stage struggling to accept it, and know every day that you're giving it your all, and your partner is giving it their all, and you have to honor that. How hard the struggle is for them. We think it's hard on us. Imagine going through that every day, being confused, not knowing what the calendar is, going through all of that. So this is just your life now, and so find a way to enjoy it. I hope of my 1,650 or whatever it was days, I really hope that most of those days went for something. And if I have another 1,600 in front of me, I want to live those days. I don't want to just get through them, as Angela said.
Well, you are fueling all of us, and I just have so much gratitude that you both joined me today. And I want to thank you for being a part of this mission, as we talked about how it's often under the radar. It is often not recognized for over a period of time. Gosh, I'm going to get emotional. Um, and I think it takes all of us to be able to use our voice so that it is recognized, and it does get the recognition that it deserves. So thank you in joining me in that mission. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
Are you looking for more support and community? We sure are. That is why I'm so happy to highlight one of my favorite podcasts in the caregiving community, Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver, hosted by my friends and sisters Natalie Elliott Handy and JJ Elliott Hill. They offer a unique blend of personal storytelling, expert advice, and candid conversations that shed light on the real-life challenges and triumphs that caregivers face. Tune in to Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver wherever you enjoy your podcasts, or explore more on their website at www.confessionsofareluctantcaregiver.com. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.